You've never actually touched anything, not your phone, not the ground, not even your own body. What you feel is just resistance, signals, tiny interactions between particles that never truly meet. And yet, your brain stitches it together into something solid, something real. Every second, your entire reality is being constructed. Not revealed, constructed. Light hits your eyes, gets flipped upside down, converted into electrical signals, and somewhere in that process, a world appears. Seamless, convincing, but delayed. You're not seeing reality, you're seeing a version of it that's already happened. At the smallest level, things don't behave like objects, they behave like probabilities. Particles don't exist in a fixed place until something observes them, measures them, forces them to decide. So here's the problem. If reality doesn't fully exist until it's observed, then what happens when no one is looking? And more importantly, what is doing the observing? Because the deeper we look, the less this feels like a universe and the more it starts to feel like something else. Something structured, something processed, something running. There's a theory that everything you've ever experienced, every conversation, every memory, every moment isn't happening in a physical universe at all, but inside a system, a simulation, not metaphorically, not philosophically, literally, as in processed, rendered, computed. And before that sounds like science fiction, this idea didn't come from conspiracy forums. It came from physicists, computer scientists, people trying to answer a very real question. What is reality actually made of? Because when you zoom in far enough, past atoms, past particles, you don't find stuff, you find information, mathematical relationships, rules. Reality starts to look less like matter and more like code, and that's where things take a turn. Because if reality behaves like information, then in theory, it can be simulated. Not perfectly, but convincingly enough that anything inside it wouldn't know the difference. Which leads to a question that's been taken more seriously than most people realize. If it's possible to simulate reality, and if advanced civilizations could eventually run those simulations, then statistically it's far more likely you're inside one than in the original. Now let that sit for a second. Not could be, more likely. And if that's true, then everything you think of as fundamental, space, time, cause and effect, might not be fundamental at all, just part of the system. Rules that can be changed, paused, rewritten. But here's where it gets uncomfortable. Because this theory doesn't just ask what reality is, it forces a different question entirely. If this is a simulation, then what is it simulating and why? This idea didn't start with computers. It started with something breaking. For a long time, reality felt stable, predictable. If you zoomed in far enough, you'd eventually find the smallest pieces holding everything together. That was the assumption. Then we actually did it. We zoomed in, and what we found didn't hold. Atoms weren't solid. They were mostly empty space. Particles didn't behave consistently. Their position, their energy, even their existence only became clear when something interacted with them. Not perfectly clear, just decided. In that moment, that discovery didn't answer questions, it multiplied them. Because now reality wasn't just complex, it was unstable at its foundation. And the deeper experiments went, the more it started to feel like something was being resolved in real time. Not stored, not fixed, resolved. That idea sat there for decades, uncomfortable, unfinished, until a completely different field started running into something similar. Computing. At first, computers were simple, basic calculations, static outputs, but as they evolved, we started building environments, worlds, and to make those worlds run efficiently, we had to make compromises. You don't render everything at once. You can't. So you render what matters, what's being looked at, what's being interacted with. Everything else exists in a lower state, waiting. It wasn't a philosophical decision, it was simply practical. Processing power is limited, but that constraint created something interesting because suddenly we had a system where reality appeared continuous while actually being generated on demand. And that raised a question no one had really asked before, at least not seriously. What if our reality works the same way? Not as a metaphor, as a structure. In 2003, philosopher Nick Bostrom took that question and pushed it further than anyone had before. He didn't treat it like science fiction, he treated it like probability. If a civilization becomes advanced enough, it will have the ability to simulate entire worlds. Not crude versions, detailed ones, with conscious observers inside them. And if that happens even once, it likely happened thousands, millions of times, which means the number of simulated realities would quickly outnumber the original. At that point, any conscious experience, statistically, is far more likely to exist inside one of those simulations than outside of them. That's not a feeling, that's math. And once that idea is on the table, you can't really ignore it, because now the question isn't just what reality is made of, it's this. If something can feel completely real, what actually separates it from being real at all? Once you start looking at reality through that lens, certain details stop feeling random and start feeling intentional. Take resolution, not visual resolution, physical resolution. There's a limit to how small space can be divided, a smallest possible unit, the Planck length. Go any smaller and the concept of distance stops making sense. Time has a limit too, the Planck time, a smallest measurable tick. It's not just that we can't measure beyond that. According to our best models, there may not be anything there to measure. So reality isn't infinitely smooth, it's quantized, discrete, like pixels. Now zoom out. The universe also has a maximum speed. Nothing can move faster than light. Not information, not causality, nothing. At first, that feels like a law, but think about what it really does. It caps how fast anything can update, how quickly information can move across the system. A universal speed limit is also a bandwidth limit. Now layer something else on top. When you're not looking at something, what's actually happening there? In quantum experiments, particles don't settle into a definite state until they're measured. Before that, they exist as probabilities, multiple possibilities at once. Not hidden, not waiting, undefined. And the moment you observe them, they resolve. One outcome, locked in. That's strange on its own, but it becomes stranger when you realize something else. The universe doesn't seem to render unnecessary detail. There's a concept called quantum decoherence, where possibilities collapse into reality through interaction. But what triggers that interaction? Where does the line exist between unresolved and real? No one can fully answer that. Now connect it back. In every simulation we've ever built, we conserve resources the same way. We don't calculate everything all at once, we calculate what's needed, when it's needed. And suddenly a pattern starts to emerge. A smallest unit of space, a smallest unit of time, a maximum speed of information, reality resolving upon observation. Individually, these are just features of physics. Together, they start to look like constraints, limits. And limits don't just define a system, they protect it. Because without them, the system breaks. So here's where things start to get uncomfortable again. If reality has resolution limits, processing limits, and rules around when things become real, then we're not just looking at a universe, we might be looking at something that's being run under constraints. And the question isn't just why those constraints exist, it's this. What happens if something inside the system starts pushing against them? Once you accept the possibility, you don't get one answer, you get a range of them. Some grounded, some uncomfortable, some hard to even take seriously at first. The most straightforward explanation is this: there is no simulation. What we're seeing, the limits, the quantization, the strange behavior at small scales, is just how reality works. Our intuition expects something smooth, continuous, but nature doesn't owe us that. So maybe nothing is being rendered, nothing is being processed, we're just finally seeing the universe clearly, and it happens to be stranger than we expected. That's the conservative view. Then there's the informational view, the idea that reality at its core is made of information, not matter. Physical laws become rules, particles become states, the universe becomes a system that evolves over time according to those rules. In that framework, a simulation isn't a separate idea, it's just another way of describing the same thing. Reality doesn't need to be running somewhere else, it already behaves like a system. Then the argument shifts again, because if reality is information, then in principle it can be recreated, not symbolically, functionally. And that leads to the simulation hypothesis as most people understand it. An advanced civilization reaches a point where it can simulate entire environments, not just visually, but physically. Every interaction, every particle, every observer. At that level, a simulated reality wouldn't feel stimulated from the inside, it would feel complete, indistinguishable. And if that's possible, then the number of simulated worlds could exceed the original. And at that point, probability takes over. It becomes more likely to exist inside one of those simulations than outside of it. That's the argument. But it doesn't stop there. Some take it further. Not just that we could be in a simulation, but that the structure of reality already reflects optimization, only resolving detailed when needed, limiting information flow, maintaining stability through constraints. That starts to look less like coincidence and more like design choices. And once you step into that territory, the questions change again. Because now it's not just are we in a simulation, it's who built it, or what, or why it's being run at all. There are theories for that too. Some suggest experimentation, a way to model civilizations to test outcomes. Others suggest preservation, simulating past realities to keep them from being lost. And some go even further, that consciousness itself isn't tied to the system, but inserted into it, experiencing it from the inside. Not trapped, just interfacing. At that point, the idea stops feeling technological and starts feeling philosophical, because every version of this leads to the same place. If your experience is indistinguishable from reality, then what exactly makes something real to begin with? And once that line blurs, it doesn't really come back. There's a reason this idea sticks around, not because it's proven, but because parts of it line up a little too well with how we already understand reality. Start with something simple, your brain. Everything you experience is processed before you're ever aware of it. Light hits your eyes, gets converted into signals, sound becomes patterns, touch becomes interpretation. By the time it reaches you, it's already been translated. What you experience isn't raw reality, it's a model your brain builds in real time and passes off as reality. And it's a good one. Stable, consistent, convincing enough that you almost never question it. But it's not perfect. Every once in a while, something slips. An illusion works when it shouldn't. A memory feels completely real until it doesn't. You notice something small that doesn't quite line up, and for a second, everything feels slightly off. Not because reality changed, because your model did, and you felt it. That matters more than it seems, because it means your experience of the world is already one step removed from whatever is actually happening. Now zoom out. When physics describes reality, it doesn't talk about solid objects the way we do. It describes systems, interactions, things changing state over time. The language is abstract because the structure is. And when we simulate something, we follow the same approach. We don't recreate matter, we recreate behavior. Set the rules, let the system run. If the rules are accurate enough, the result holds together. It behaves in a way that feels real. Not perfect, just consistent. And consistency is all reality really requires. Now imagine a system advanced enough to simulate every interaction at a fundamental level. From the inside, it wouldn't feel artificial. It wouldn't feel simulated. It would just feel normal. Every test would return a coherent result. Every measurement would make sense. Every cause would lead to an effect. There wouldn't be a moment where the system breaks character. There wouldn't be anything obvious to point to and say, this is fake. There's also a practical limitation. Simulating everything everywhere all at once would require an impossible amount of resources. So any system doing that would need to be efficient. It would prioritize, focus detail where it's needed, reduce it where it isn't, only rendering what's being interacted with and letting the rest sit in the background. That idea sounds familiar for a reason, because at a fundamental level, reality already behaves like that. There are limits to how much information you can extract at once, limits to precision. Not just because of our tools, because of how the system itself operates. There's a boundary built in, clean, consistent. So from a strictly logical standpoint, there's nothing about reality that requires it to be the base layer. It only requires that it holds together, that the rules don't break, that interactions make sense. And if those conditions are met, if everything behaves exactly the way it should, then from the inside, there's no clear way to tell what you're in. That's where this stops being abstract, because any test you run, any observation you make is still happening inside the system you're trying to question. You're using its rules to try to step outside of it, and that doesn't really work. So the question shifts again, quietly. Not is this a simulation, but whether there's something you could ever prove from here, or if the search itself is just another process running inside it, a system trying to understand itself. Up to this point, this has been a question about reality, structure, physics, possibility, but this is where it shifts. Because if this is a simulation, then it's not just reality that changes, it's you. Not your body, but your perspective. Because everything you've ever known, every memory, every decision, every moment would exist inside a system. And from the inside, it would all feel completely real. Your childhood, your relationships, the things you care about, the things that shaped you, none of that would feel artificial because experience doesn't need to be fundamental to be meaningful. And that creates a strange tension because if something can feel real, if it can shape you, affect you, define you, then what exactly is it missing? What's the difference between something that's real and something that's experienced as real? That line starts to blur. Now take it one step further. If this is a system, then it's running. And anything that runs can be paused, changed, reset. Not in a dramatic, visible way. You wouldn't see it happen. From the inside, it would still feel continuous because your memory of it would update with it. You wouldn't remember the interruption, you would just continue. And that introduces something harder to sit with because now you're not just asking what reality is, you're asking whether this moment right now is part of something ongoing or something that's been restarted more times than you could ever know. And there's another layer to it. If this is a simulation, then it's being observed. Maybe not constantly, maybe not in detail, but at some level, there's a perspective outside the system. And if that's true, then your entire life, every thought, every action, every choice is part of something being watched, not necessarily judged, just seen. And you wouldn't know when or why or what matters. That uncertainty changes things quietly because it means the boundaries you've always assumed between private and observed, between internal and external, might not exist in the way you think they do. Now bring it back to you. If everything you experience feels real and there's no clear way to step outside it, then your life doesn't become meaningless. If anything, it becomes the only thing you have access to, the only layer you can interact with. So whether this is base reality or something running on top of it, your experience doesn't change, but your understanding of it does. And once that shift happens, it's hard to fully go back. Because even if you reject the idea, even if you decide none of this is true, the question is still there. Quiet, persistent, sitting just under everything else. What if this isn't the base layer and you were never meant to know? At some point, the question stops being what this is and turns into something else. Why this? Not just why a universe exists, why this version of it, these rules, these limits. Because if this is a system, then it wasn't just built, it was configured. And configuration implies intent, even if that intent isn't obvious. And maybe it's simple, a simulation to test outcomes, run scenarios, see what happens under different conditions. Civilizations rise, collapse, repeat. Maybe it's preservation, a way to keep something running long after the original is gone. Not the source, but something close enough to remember it. Or maybe it's something else entirely, something we wouldn't recognize even if we were looking straight at it. Because every explanation we come up with still comes from inside the system. We're trying to understand the purpose using the rules we were given, and that might be the limit. Because if this is a simulation, then whatever exists outside of it doesn't have to follow any of this. Not our logic, not our sense of time, not even cause and effect. So even asking why might be the wrong question, but it's the only one we have. And once that idea settles in, things don't feel fake, they feel conditional, like they're being held in place, like they're being rendered, only as long as they're needed. And maybe that's the part that lingers. Not whether this is real, but whether it's stable, whether it continues, or whether at any moment, without warning, it could just stop. No fade, no transition, just nothing. And if that were to happen, there wouldn't be a final moment. No awareness of it ending, because whatever is experiencing this would end with it. So the question isn't just what this is, It's this: if your entire reality depends on something you can't access, something you can't observe, something that may not even exist in the way you understand existence, then what does it actually mean for any of this to be real? Thank you for watching another deep dive from around the way. Like, comment, subscribe, let us know what crazy topic you want us to cover next. Have a good one.